Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. So I was looking at a column of videos that I've done, just kind of like the picture of all the videos, and I noticed that pretty much I wear the same thing in every video. I guess I've got a fairly limited wardrobe when it comes to hiking. But anyhow, so I'll try to mix it up. It looks like I've shot every video on the same day, which I've actually never done that. I've never done 2 videos in the same day. I'm not opposed to it, but I've never done that. But it looks like I do that every single time because it looks like I wear the same thing every time. So I'll try to mix it up one of these days. Another thing we need is a new definition of obesity. There's a really interesting research paper that came out just recently that was published in the Frontiers of Public Health by one of my favorite researchers and lecturers. His name is Phil Maffetone, and you can read more about him on the internet. He's a clinician and researcher. He's been in practice for many years. I've been following his work for 2 decades, and he has a very simple but well-researched philosophy of health and disease and fitness, and really interesting information. But he and some other researchers published this research paper, and they are explaining to us that we need to come up with a more inclusive definition of obesity. Currently, obesity is defined by your BMI, your body mass index. And your body mass index is a simple calculation of your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters, and then that's squared, and then that comes up with a number. And this number, which you can easily find, there's charts and calculators that you can easily find on the internet to figure out your own BMI. But basically what it comes down to is if the number is between 25 and 29.9, you're overweight, and if it's over 30, you're considered obese. And this qualification comes from the World Health Organization, the WHO. And so although the numbers globally, and certainly here in the United States, are staggering with regard to overweight and obesity, when we actually broaden the definition to include other types of obesity, the number is actually much, much more staggering. And this information comes out in this research paper that was published last month in the Frontiers of Public Health. And the statistics that they come out with is that in the United States, over 90% of males are considered obese. When I tell you kind of this latest description of other types of obesity, and over 81% females in the United States would be considered obese when we broaden the definition beyond just the BMI. And the reason why we need to broaden that definition is because there's some people that don't, that by the numeric value of the BMI are not considered overweight or obese, but they're considered over fat. There's the body weight measurement using the weight scale mostly measures water weight. Water weight's mostly in the muscles. It doesn't really have that much to do with fat. And so understanding a person's body fat is much more indicative of risk factor for things like cardiometabolic illness. Cardiometabolic illness is like heart disease, diabetes, even cancer is thrown in there. So these kind of chronic diseases that are really plaguing our culture today is more broadly understood to be a risk if we understand a person's body fat and not just their height to weight ratio. So when we consider body fat as a better indicator, there's more broader and, let's say, additional types of obesity, and they're described in the literature of things like normal weight obesity. And what they mean is on a BMI scale, their weight is within acceptable boundaries, but they have too much fat in their system, too much typically abdominal fat or visceral fat. Another type is called metabolically obese normal weight. That's another category. And there's other categories like sarcopenic obesity. And these different types of normal weight but obese or over fat types of obesity need to be considered, and when they are, that's when these statistics really balloon, and they come up with the statistic of over 90% of males in the US fall into this broader definition, or let's say additional types of obesity. And they come with all the same risk factors. Not only the BMI, we know that comes with additional risk factor of prediabetes and diabetes and heart disease and strokes and certain types of cancer, but also these other types of obesity that I just mentioned also contribute a same or similar risk factor for these chronic illnesses. And so it's important to understand that there's better ways to measure it. And there's really fancy ways of measuring body fat percentage. There's different bioimpedance and fancy machines and different things that you can use. But there's a very simple way that you can measure it at home. In fact, you probably have all the tools you need at home, and that's just a tape measure. With a tape measure, you just want to measure your waist circumference. Waist circumference is a pretty basic, very basic, but actually quite reliable indicator of one of these other types of obesity. So you just want to measure your waist circumference, and the waist, just so you know, in the technical sense, is around the umbilicus, or the belly button. So you just want to measure around the belly button. Another slightly more sophisticated, but really just as simple, is the waist to height ratio. And this might be done more by a clinician, more by your doctor or provider. And that's just a ratio between your waist, which again is around the belly button, to your height ratio. And you want that ratio to be less than 0.5. In other words, you want your waist to be less than half the length of your height. And this is actually a really good, reliable indicator that if your waist is more than half of the length of your height, then you are considered to fall into one of these additional categories of obesity, even if your BMI is below 30 for obesity or below 25 for overweight. So you might fall into one of these categories, which has, like I said, the same risk factor for these cardiometabolic issues. So I'd encourage you, just if you don't have a simple tape measure, get one or ask your doctor to do the measurement. And it's something really cool that you can test on a monthly basis. As you make changes to your diet and lifestyle, you can really start to see these changes be made. And here's just a couple really simple things that you can start doing today. Of course, there could be metabolic factors that you have to consider on an individual basis, like hormones and other metabolism and metabolic and digestive issues. But to keep it real basic, the way that you can start to change, in other words, if your waist is more than half the length of your height and you do fall into one of these obesity categories, a couple things that they discuss in the literature that Phil Maffetone has discussed for many decades is to fall into a more normal category. What you want to do is you just want to eliminate all refined carbohydrates. The refined carbohydrates are anything that's made from flour, anything that's like breads, pastas, crackers, chips, cookies, pastries, anything made from flour is considered a refined carbohydrate. So you want to eliminate those. You eliminate sugar and you eliminate junk food. That's it. Of course, it's simple to say. Depending on what your diet is, it might be a little bit difficult for some people to make those kind of changes, but make those kind of incremental changes, and they've shown that that will definitely decrease your waist circumference, and that will overall lower your obesity risk factor. The other thing to do, which Phil Maffetone has suggested many times, is to follow his 180 formula for cardiovascular exercise. Just real quick on that, the 180 formula is you take 180, and you subtract your age, and then you could plus or minus 5 or 10 depending on your fitness level. So for example, you go 180 minus your age, let's say you're 40, so 180 minus 40 is 140, and then you plus or minus 5 or 10. If you just had a recent injury or illness, you subtract 5 or 10 depending on severity. If you've been exercising for a couple years, you haven't had any injuries, then you plus or minus 0. So you would just start with 140. And what the way the 180 formula works is that's your heart rate. So you bring your heart rate up to 140 in this example, and you exercise aerobically for, ramp it up depending on what your fitness level is, but bring it up to 30, 45, 60 minutes a day, and that'll dramatically improve your aerobic fitness. When we become more aerobically fit, we start burning more fat as energy instead of sugar. And then our sugar cravings go down and our fat burning goes way, way, way up. And you can really dramatically decrease the risk factor for these cardiometabolic issues. So get the refined carbs out. Well, first of all, do the measurements. Get the refined carbs out, get the junk food out, get the sugar out, do the 180 formula for aerobic fitness, and enjoy all the fat burning and the decrease of waist circumference. So I hope this was helpful. I'll keep reading the literature and bringing you the information, and maybe next time I'll change my wardrobe so you're not looking at the same thing every single time. We'll talk to you next time. Keep it real.